This is Forensic Talk with Jim Campbell. All talk and all crime. Inside the largest insider trading ring in Wall Street history, a claim of innocence of the charges, an admission of guilt of bad judgment in the choice of partners, a charge of prosecutorial abuse that destroyed a business, a reputation, and a family. Confessions of a Wall Street insider today on Forensic Talk with Jim Campbell. Michael Kimelman is a graduate of Lafayette College and the University of Southern California Law School. My daughter's getting a master's degree next month. They're going to graduation out at USC.
Excellent.
Mike was an associate at the White Shoe New York law firm Sullivan & Cromwell. He was founding partner, managing director of Incremental Capital, a hedge fund with over $250 million in assets, which closed shortly after his arrest. Post-prison, he's involved with new ventures in culinary, retail, and entertainment spaces, also dedicated himself to prison and education reform. And he's local to our WGCH Greenwich flagship station, hailing from Mamaroneck, New York. The new book generating a lot of buzz out there, Confessions of a Wall Street Insider, a cautionary tale of rats, feds, and banksters. Mike, good to see you.
Great to be here, Jim. Thank you.
Thanks for coming in studio as well, even several hours earlier. Are you sorry, by the way, that the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York, Preet Bharara, is no longer in that job?
Not quite heartbroken. Whether it was a resignation or a firing, I think it was probably time and not a bad thing.
And we just did an interview with David Gannick, who also had his office stormed by the FBI and was innocent of the charges. So it's a pretty brutal event to go through, particularly if you're not guilty.
A tremendous amount of collateral damage there. An entire firm and, dozens, if not hundreds of employees laid off for more or less a public show of force.
Yes, and your firm had 55 people, I think, when they invaded your home, which we'll talk about. Let me ask you this, though, first. At the time, Preet had a record of like 80-0, undefeated. Now, he's since had a couple of the convictions overturned. Is the good that comes together from changing and breaking the culture of insider trading say, okay, we'll excuse the couple of mistakes, although you were one of the couple of mistakes, or not, in your mind?
No. I do think there was quite a bit of good that was done, and that investigation and some of the people who were prosecuted obviously should have been prosecuted, and the evidence and the facts say that those were good cases to make. But where I disagree is the legal system is sort of set up so that we let 10 guilty people go free rather than one innocent person go to prison. And those odds were flipped on their head. In those 80 or 88 cases, it wasn't just me. There was several others who probably were innocent of the charges, who were just coerced into pleading or forced to testify against others, to get themselves a lighter sentence. But it became a problem when it became a singular obsession of the U.S. Attorney's Office and the administration, especially during the height of the financial crisis, when there was lots of bad actors and other, people to be investigated, if not for directly causing the financial crisis, then for certainly contributing to it. And all those cases were neglected in favor of these easy money, easy headline insider trading cases that the prosecutors could make and then trumpet in the press that they're actually doing something about this and ameliorate an angry public who had every right to be angry.
Raj Rajaratnam, of course, now everybody knows one of the biggest insider trading ring.
Sure.
At the time, are you saying that you were not aware the degree to which this guy was dealing in inside info?
Not even close.
Really?
And there's, when I go back and say that to some people, there are a few who are like, come on, everybody thought Raj or everybody knew Raj. And I think that's a lot of Monday morning quarterbacking. There might have been a few people, but I attribute it in the same vein as Enron. When you say Enron now, everyone's like, yeah, what a fraud. So when I worked at a law firm at Sullivan & Cromwell, everybody wanted to go work for Enron. Enron was considered the greatest company out there, the most innovative, smartest people, like literally Bethany McLean, smartest guys in the room, or whoever wrote it.
She's great, by the way.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And you had, cover of Business Week, Ken Skilling, cover of Fortune, the smartest guy out there, McKinsey, Harvard. And then, of course, 6 months later, everyone's like, yeah, I knew it. So it's Monday morning quarterbacking. To me, Raj was just the smartest tech investor in the game. And, he had a $7 billion fund. There was glowing articles and press about him. And obviously, there was some other stuff going on that he shouldn't have been doing. But you can't say everybody knew that. I don't even think, a small sliver of people knew that. He was just a good investor.
So then let's see if my next question's even relevant to you then. Did insider trading become so pervasive that I compare it to steroids in baseball, which is you had to do it to compete, and we just sort of overlooked it? Did you get that feeling?
I don't think it's a bad analogy. I don't think it was as prevalent. I don't think it was acknowledged. It certainly, at least from a prosecutorial standpoint, it was ignored and neglected for 15 or 20 years. And then the way I attribute it more is that there was always sort of two tiers. So there was a tier of people like a Raj who had extreme access and, could be on the phone with a Goldman Sachs board member or an insider and clearly getting inside information. There's no doubt about that. Then there are other people, and I consider myself in that other group, who would hear things on a trading desk. We would probably get 10 to 12 rumors a week or calls, high conviction play,
right.
My SAC guy likes this, my Galleon guy or other hedge funds are looking into this company. And that's a radically different level of access or information, because in that case, there's no way to confirm or validate the call. There's no way to, go out and question the intermediaries and determine the credibility or the conviction level of the call. So it's sort of a swim at your own risk mentality for everybody else. But the bottom line is, Jim, if you look at charts of any stock that had any significant corporate activity for 20 years, and there's been plenty of academic studies that have done this, somebody always knows. That's generally was our philosophy. So we were trying to piggyback off people who we thought would know. I mean, nobody takes, a call and hopes it's wrong. You're in this game to make money and trading to make money. You hope whoever's giving you an idea, a trading idea, has done their own research, done their own work, and it's a good idea. But half the time I would get a call like that, I would actually flip it on the other side and short it or take the other side of the trade because I thought it was deliberate disinformation from a hedge fund. And that's a common tactic too in the game, in that if a fund has a large position and then they hear that bad news is coming or get keyed into that, they need to get out of that position without crushing the stock. So what they'll do often is put out a false rumor of, hey, great earnings coming,
Sleazy.
or somebody's kicking the tires, and in that additional buying power momentum,
sneak it out.
They'll dump the stock and not crush it.
We should say SAC is Steve Cohen's former hedge fund, and Galleon is Roger Rotten's. Let me ask you this. You could have obviously a very low profile right now. You're out. Why are you putting yourself back in the public spotlight?
Because I think it's a story that needs to be told. I think there was, my case was outrageous in many ways. I didn't get justice in that case, so I am out for redemption. We had a judge who has now been overruled in every single insider trading case that came after mine. He used the wrong jury
instructions. Bad luck for you, though, eh?
It was bad luck for me. And again, more than bad luck. I mean, I think there was a deliberate act on the part of the U.S. attorney, as well as, this judge was complicit in it, that he was a hand-picked judge in some ways. There was a whole series of insider trading cases. Somehow the judge we had heard an overwhelming, large proportion of those cases. And in those cases, I think cases were steered to him because he was giving the U.S. attorney a lower hurdle to jump over. He was omitting an entire element of the crime in the jury instructions and giving wrong jury instructions. And both sides have now admitted that. The judge has acknowledged, after a very public spanking by the Second Circuit as well as the media, that the jury instructions were incorrect. They were using the wrong law and had omitted an entire element of the crime. And so has Preet Bharara and the U.S. attorney. But instead of what I would consider doing the right thing and vacating my conviction, especially after I went to prison for several years, probation, had my firm destroyed, my reputation, my licenses, and everything else, is they're hanging their hat on a technicality or a procedural defect and trying to get out of doing the right thing, which would be vacating the case.
Is it important to you that it get vacated at some point?
From a pragmatic, practical day-to-day,
it doesn't.
No.
Really,
I already served the time. I already had everything taken away from me. I'm a guy who's going to come out and do what I do. I grind. I'm a father. I'm going to live my life. But at the same time, from a reputational and a redemption point of view, it would be the right thing to do, so they should do it. Are you
able to vote and things like that when you?
I think the way it works, it's a state-by-state case, and I don't want to go into it too in depth because I haven't researched the laws, but just as a kick, I asked a friend to go when they voted this year in New York to just see if I was on the voting rolls. Just ask the question. And she did. And Of course, I was there, and she did some follow-up asking of, well, if he's there, because there's all this talk of voter fraud and everything else.
Right.
They said, how does it work? And the people at the poll said, look, if he was there in 2012 and voted, he would be on the rolls. So that's why he's on the rolls. And of course, in 2012, I was in prison, so I clearly wasn't voting there. But it was a mess, and I went in and looked at some of it myself, and so. I do have the ability to vote, I believe, in New York to get back.
You mentioned this briefly, but let's get it out there. A lot of people feel that insider trading is rather victimless, and the mortgage crisis wiped out at the time about 40% of a lot of middle Americans' net worth. And the prosecutors seem to, A, not focus on it, and B, say they couldn't prove guilt when we knew that a lot of the folks on Wall Street knew that the mortgages were complete crap, full of liar loans. Do you think this was a big mistake, not to focus on that?
I think it was not only a mistake, but I think it was a deliberate mistake. I think the insider trading cases, like you said, easy to prove, easy money, easy headlines. It's a simple and convenient narrative that the administration can sell to an angry public, to show them they're doing something about the financial crisis. When in reality, had they taken a proper investigative approach and actually pursued some of these cases, it may have yielded some real targets and some real reform. But they never did that. And it wasn't because they didn't try. It was because, look, if you're going to take on real power and real money, there's a chance you lose. And if there's a chance you lose, it's going to hurt your career. And unfortunately, the career calculus plays such a large role in the cases that are brought that it's very sad. And it's a truth of where we are right now, that winning is the ultimate goal when it comes to the Justice Department. That's it. Truth and justice take a backseat to winning, and that's unfortunate.
All right, let's jump right in now. Tell the folks what it was like to basically, out of the blue, be perp walked out of your house in that nice town down the road called Larchmont.
It was shocking, and it was, terrorizing is a word I've used before. It was completely unnecessary. I was arrested and in front of my family and dogs and multiple armed agents and just in a giant show of force that was designed to do one thing: terrorize and get me to cooperate. Now, the amazing thing is, again, I had this done without anybody asking me a single question, and that's another issue I have. What would have been the harm in having the SEC or the DOJ or anybody
ask you first,
confront me and ask me a question, saying, you know what, we think you were a part of this insider trading ring. Come in and talk to us, or we're going to arrest you. Or they could have said, come in, present yourself for arrest, so we don't have to do this. But to sort of barge into the house, deliberately scaring children, my wife.
It was early in the morning, right? You were
5
asleep.
a.m., multiple. It was a SWAT team, with the K-9s and everything else. And they searched the house and made a big show of searching it. And, like I said, what am I being arrested for? And they wouldn't really talk. They wanted me to cooperate. When they found out I wasn't going to cooperate, it was securities fraud. It was very short and clipped. And, but then we have to search the house. And what are you searching for? The securities? What's going on here? But like I said, they should have asked the question, because I think in this case, they really didn't do their homework, because once they actually did a fuller investigation, and we were trying to get the case dropped before I got indicted. The way it works is you get arrested, then you get indicted. Sometimes it's done at the same time, but they ended up indicting me, but the day of indictment saying, hey, we realize your guy is radically different from any of the other guys in this case, and he's a peripheral player at most. Let him plead guilty to 1 count of conspiracy, and we'll get him out of the case. We'll give him probation, no jail time. Just be done. We don't want you there anymore. And of all the prosecutors I've talked to, and I actually have a lot of friends who were prosecutors before this, and they're still my friends because they understand this case was a joke to some degree.
Yeah.
They said, I've never even considered indicting somebody and then giving them probation for not cooperating the day of indictment. It just doesn't happen. And the amount of money they charged in the indictment was $16,000.
That you gained through insider trading.
Yeah, the prosecutors I've talked to are like, I've never even seen a federal indictment for $16,000. You belong on people's court, not but any amount of money. It's not the amount of money that's relevant. I didn't commit the crime. I could tell you in no uncertain terms, I did not trade 3Com on inside information. The case was a vapor type case that was brought at the height of the financial crisis down the street from Occupy Wall Street. So you had this public frenzy to convict, and I knew I was dead literally the moment I walked into the courtroom. And the government wanted me out of that case, and they clearly wouldn't give me a separate trial because they knew sitting me next to my partner, who was guilty as sin, would have been an effective trial strategy. But I knew I was dead during first day of jury selection when the judge, trying to get rid of some of the biases, asked the jury pool, how many of you here have a negative view of hedge funds or Wall Street? And you saw the hands shot up. You would have think they were giving away a free iPad the way hands shot up. And from that point on, literally any comment you heard was, nobody gets arrested by accident and everything else. I knew it was going to be an uphill battle, especially when you consider the amount of money involved and that a lot of the members of the jury didn't have access to that type of financial means. And that was, one of the more effective tactics of the prosecutors. They just put on the whiteboard, highlighted it. He made $150,000 in a single day. And meanwhile, they did that with stocks they didn't even charge me. So that doesn't make any sense either. Yeah. I mean, how do you put trades that I wasn't charged with? Because they were clearly just trying to say it's so much money. And again, it's is from a gross amount, but from a relative or a net amount, it was a tiny fraction of the money I was managing. But for a guy who makes, our forewoman worked at Best Buy in the Bronx, making $750 an hour selling DVDs part-time. Yeah, so $150,000 in a day is an enormous amount of money to anyone.
She thinks you're just a greedy guy. And how did your kids and your wife deal with that moment there? Your kids were too young maybe to fully grasp it?
They were too young. My daughter was of an age, she was about 5, where she was at least conscious of it. The boys were very young. My wife at the time was terrified and crying and upset and why are you in my house and what's going on and there's very little so if they had told me, at least I would have had a better idea, and I had some idea because Raj had been arrested 2 weeks earlier. My partner had worked directly for Raj during the time in question. I had read obviously the Raj criminal complaint, seen the stocks he traded, stocks Raj traded. I traded one of those stocks, Hilton. So when they actually came and told me it was securities fraud, and
you thought it might be Hilton.
I thought it might be Hilton, even though I knew I had no idea about Hilton either. It was another, hey, smart guys buying Hilton. They're hearing could be something on the horizon. Right. Who knows? I'm going to buy a little bit. But again, it was done purely to terrorize.
So I will go to the other side of that. You do feel you were guilty of bad judgment, and you just led into that pretty well. Your partner, Zvi Goffer, I think is how you say it. Talk a little bit about that.
So, Zvi is a classic con artist or grifter. He was a very charming guy, a good-looking guy. He had, sort of a rags to riches story that he was fond of promoting, grew up with nothing. And then was very big about telling people he had turned down, and he had the letter, I turned down a JD MBA, acceptance from Harvard because I was making so much money trading.
Sounds like Martoma, by the way.
Not entirely different.
Yeah.
And, of course, when I did get arrested, they put us all on a hanger. And, again, of the 8 or 7 people, 9 people I was arrested with, I only knew 2 or 3 of them. The other 6 I thought were part of a different case, but they were actually part of our case, and they were interrogating us all at once.
Mind-boggling.
And Zvi was not far from me and, having the time of his life, ordering bagels, drinking orange juice, entertaining the agents. And the agents asked him, what's your highest level of education? And he looked right at me and smiled and winked and said high school. So...
Which you didn't know.
Right. No, he was, he told everybody he graduated summa cum laude from Binghamton, had been accepted to Harvard, perfect SATs, and he had a career trajectory that wouldn't make you think too much about it. He had worked for a great couple of hedge funds and then got a job working directly with Raj, who, again, at the time was the best tech investor in the game, bar none, and Galleon, one of the best funds out there. People would sell their, little finger to go work for Galleon at that time.
We're getting down to the last 40 seconds here of this segment. How quickly, you must have picked up pretty quickly that he was a BS artist and a con guy.
Yes.
So you have to take responsibility for going into business with this sucker? Or?
Absolutely, and that's one of the ultimate lessons, I think, is at a certain point, if you've been around him for 6 months or more, there started to be some lies that wouldn't add up. But it was more, there was a lot of behavior that goes on, drinking and driving or whatever it is, small vices that I think a lot of people do. So there was nothing that rose to the level of, hey, this guy might be trying to bribe a lawyer. but it was just somebody who I didn't trust and somebody who I didn't feel good about, but nothing that would rise to the level of, hey, this is a sociopath. I got to walk away from an 8 or a 9-figure firm that I built and I own a huge chunk of in order to get rid of this psychopath. Unfortunately, you're responsible for the people you surround ourselves with, and I take ownership of that. It's what I try to impart to my children and at-risk youth that I speak to. So, yeah, you have to stand up for that.
So to summarize it, he's 100% guilty, and you were unaware of that.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Go ahead.
You're listening to Forensic Talk with Jim Campbell. We're talking with Mike Kimelman, wrongly convicted of insider trading. We'll be right back. And we're back with Mike Kimelman, the author of Confessions of a Wall Street Insider, a cautionary tale of rats, feds, and banksters. This is something that always gets to me. You guys make your money because you really inherently understand risk management. How is it that you guys screw up so badly on the plea stuff? You have Matthew Martoma, you have this guy who has a 10-year sentence, V we're talking about. You're innocent, you got a 2-year sentence. How do you guys screw up that risk management assessment?
That is a great question, and I'm actually writing an article about it right now, which hopefully will be finished soon. But I could speak to Zvi directly. He was one of these people who, once you have that narrow view of the world, and he had external facts didn't seep through. I think Martoma is probably a similar character. You're used to getting what you want. You're used to excelling. You don't really take other people's opinions as well. You have your narrow filter. Zvi sort of took an approach, and again, there were 7 informants. There was 500 hours of tape. There were some of the craziest tapes you've ever heard. Him whispering, hey, if we get caught, we're going to the big house, and this and that type of stuff. Really cartoonish, ridiculous
And
things.
by the way, you never appear in these tapes, right, except for one mention?
No, I'm in some of the tapes, but not those types of tapes. There are some tapes where he's talking to me about plays. There are some tapes that don't sound great from a contextual point of view because they're taken out of context or referring to stocks that I wasn't trading or charged with. I'm not on the tapes where he's literally graphically, and there's 4 or 5 guys in the case who are graphically discussing inside information, lawyers, bribes, and all that stuff.
Unbelievable.
We made a big deal about at trial of the 9 people in the case. I was the only one that didn't have a prepaid phone or a burner phone. Everybody else had a burner phone. I was the only one who didn't pay cash bribes. Everybody else was paying cash bribes. In Zvi's case, he just, hey, OJ got off, I'm going to get off. These things are ridiculous.
So I've got all these tapes, and Martoma was the same way. They could plea bargain their way to X.
Yes.
And they take 10 years.
Insane and idiotic with Zvi's case.
Yeah.
And it actually crushed me too because the government knew I was a peripheral player, so they had first offered me the probation deal. Additionally, then, as we were going to trial, they said, look, my attorney went to them and said, I take it if, the brothers, there was Zvi and his brother, were the only 2 others that, were foolish enough to go to trial with me. If they drop out of the case and take the plea, I take it you're not going to go forward with Mike's case. And they said yes. They were literally offering me a deferred prosecution, which is as close to dropping the charges as you can get these days, if the brothers pled. And my attorney was like, of course they're going to plea. This is a airtight case. Don't worry about it. And I kept telling him, they're not. He is single-focused and thinks he's going to win at trial and he's going to pull some type of magic rabbit out of a hat, but he's going to get. And I had these conversations, and we almost came to blows several times in bars and elsewhere going up to trial where I said, you're going to get 10 years, bud. I don't know what you're thinking or what you're doing, but you're crushing your brother. You're crushing me, who had nothing to do with this. Take a plea, be a man. And he refused. And of course, he said, no, most I'll get is 5 years, 4 years.
Raj was the same way, basically.
Yeah. Raj, I think they were making a big example out of. So I don't think Raj was offered a plea that was probably that attractive. And I don't know for a fact what he was offered. So they may have said, plea to it and you'll get 10 because you might get 15. And if, look, they're offering 10, maybe it's worth rolling the dice, especially when you could pay $50 million for a legal team that can drum up everything in the world. But yeah, Martoma, a whole nother story.
Tell us, if we go back a little bit to the path, you're at Sullivan and Cromwell, which is like, about his white shirt program, right to, partner and all that. How do you, first I guess you considered it basically sucking your soul out. How did you get from there to essentially trading, which would seem to be the least thing a risk-averse lawyer would even contemplate?
Sure. And I was never truly risk-averse. even as a lawyer, I thought I had the right mentality to counsel clients and not be the principal or the client. You know, when I was on a good career path, I was respected at the firm. But it was the late 90s, and people were making, you know, a lot more money than I was and working, more importantly, a hell of a lot less than I was. You know, I was sleeping under my desk 2 to 3 times a night and editing documents. Like, you know, as a 25, 26-year-old kid in New York City, that's not a job that you get excited about.
It was worse than Lewisburg Prison.
There was a Groundhog Day element to both of it. So I said I wanted to trade. I had always traded. In law school, I had made some good money trading and on very lousy trading tools. And even at Sullivan and Cromwell, the compliance officer, I kind of made him rewrite the rules, or they had to do it around me because nobody traded back then. But you needed to get permission, and then I think there was a 30-day or a 7-day hold. You know, and it was during the Asian crisis. I was banging around and, you know, trying to trade, you know, this and that. And I remember, I think one day I bought Cisco off the Thai baht devaluation, and when it was down $12 or $10 and sold it up $5 the next day and made like 10 grand and literally said, all right, I just made more than a month's salary in 10 minutes for something that was the most obvious trade I've ever seen. I might have a better career elsewhere.
So all your compatriots there must have thought you were out of your mind.
They did a little bit with regard to that stuff.
Essentially, these proprietary trading firms and like Daytech, they have quasi, you know, sleazy reputations. Do you think there's value in day trading ultimately?
Right now, no. Back then, absolutely. I mean, back then, you know.
Well, no, I don't mean that you can make money in it.
Right.
I mean, is it adding any value to society? Are you creating anything?
Well, that's a great overall question that's better applied now to high-frequency trading.
Yes.
I mean, high-frequency trading, the people who are in favor of it will argue it adds liquidity. I don't agree with that. It's a tax on the retail investor. It's a tax on the market. And do we really want investing tens, if not hundreds of billions of dollars in infrastructure to try to gain a 1/10 of a fraction of a second,
which is, by the way, legalized front running to begin with.
Legalized front running, and maybe it's not even legal in some cases, but it's a waste of societal resources.
By the way, you make a good point in this book too, that the Goldman, Merrill, the Lehmans, Morgan Stanley are in a sense a cartel. And that the SEC really goes and plays with these Daytech type guys, and lets the mob control things. I don't think a lot of people understand that.
No, and that was mind blowing to me when I was early on in my trading career, because I had worked for, you know, at Sullivan, we had done a lot of work with the SEC for IPOs, for private placements and whatnot. And everybody always thought they were the beat cop that was protecting the retail investor and so on and so forth. And then you get to one of these firms that was an upstart like Daytech, who was utilizing a technology that had been put in place called SOES, which was basically the first electronic trading that was put in place after 1987 in the market crash when brokers weren't answering their phones.
Yep.
And it was for the small investor. And then you see the SEC disregarding blatant, you know, predatory behavior on the part of banks and collusion to keep a pricing cartel and keep spreads artificially wide. And then going after a guy at Daytech who, you know, may have canceled an order after, you know, 15 seconds instead of 18 seconds. And you start looking at that again and again and realizing that the SEC was really the corrupt cop that was there to protect that cartel. And things have changed a little bit since then. Since the financial crisis, I do believe Wall Street has changed quite a bit, and the regulators have changed quite a bit. But back then, they were basically the incompetent, corrupt cop that was protecting the cartel.
So things were pretty wild at Daytech, though. I love the Christmas parties described as the Full Employment Act for sex workers and unlicensed pharma dealers, and you do $500,000 of damage at the Waldorf.
There was, quite a, you know, I don't know if that was the exact number, but there was quite a bit of rabble rousing, and back then in the late 90s, look, there was, you know, behavior that wasn't always admired. It certainly, some of it wouldn't be tolerated today, as it shouldn't be. But, you know, people were making a lot of money late 90s. You're taking 21-year-old kids right out of Harvard or right out of Dartmouth, you know, giving them a trading pad. They're all athletes, so they're hyper competitive. And this isn't like Wolf of Wall Street boiler room garbage or some of these others. These were real smart guys.
It wasn't pump and dump.
Who were playing a video game, which is what really the markets amount to. You know, the most advanced, you know, most difficult video game out there. And when you give a kid like that and he suddenly makes $100,000 in a month, probably more than his dad made, you know, all last year or possibly in his life.
In his life, yeah.
And then you start, you know, you get into that New York lifestyle.
It's a whole big deal. I went to business school at Dartmouth then, so I'll gloss over that. These clowns going into.
I always called the Dartmouth guys the best drinkers after Lafayette. I mean, at Lafayette, people, happy hour was a religious.
I don't want to admit, but in our dorms at Tuck, we were on tap in the dorms.
Yeah, no, it's the same here. They used to have keg nights, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. So it was not conducive towards academic excellence. I'll put it that way.
But we did work our butts off. I will have to say this. Talk about incremental now. What made you do this? And you and V. It's interesting. V he seemed to have all these connections, but in the end, you didn't seem to get the money from Galleon or Steve Cohen or 50 Cent even.
Right. He was a vapor guy. I describe him as the ultimate over-promising, under-delivering guy. And my personality is the exact opposite. Yeah, incremental was an idea I had. I was at other hedge funds or other proprietary funds, and I saw really it became like a casino where if you can get a transaction fee off your traders, charge them, an upgrade on their tickets, on their shares, you had a nice little cushion that you
it's very interesting to me. So you actually were making money on all the trades before you even got into profitable trading.
Absolutely. We could literally break even and still make, several $1 million a month just off trading volume.
And you did not have to pay these guys salaries, in other words. Nope. They came to work for incremental.
Right. We gave them...
You built them the trading platform and...
We had all the trading, the risk management, all the technology, and then we gave them a big pot of money to trade with. And the typical prop arrangement is it's not their money, it's our money, and they could keep some percentage of their profits. So I had formed Incremental. The idea was going to do it with another trader who I really, again, talk about a life-altering course. This trader decided to stay at the previous hedge fund we were at, so I still went forward with the idea because I knew ultimately it would be very successful. At a certain point, Zvi and his brother had either capital or pitched on, connections. When I look back, there was a lot of times there with Zvi on the phone with Raj and me in the room listening, and he's having a conversation that I now look back, especially after I got the wire transcripts and the toll records.
That he may not have even been speaking to.
No, there was nobody on the other end of that call.
Wow.
That's the type of person he was.
I like the scene when you're talking to 50 Cent and Zvi's pushing things, and you're saying, you realize if we underperform in a month, they might kill us. Right. It's not just,
50 had been shot 9 times. I'm not looking to, like I said, when my business deals go bad, I want a guy with a Mont Blanc pen coming after me.
Explain to me how you do risk management at Incremental. When you hear that, there's 40 of us are long in X. We're all hearing good things about it. And then there's, some guys. How are you managing that? Because you would assume you'd want a balanced book, or you would not want people just flying off on the...
We did run a balanced book. Traders themselves had certain parameters that were custom designed and then programmed into the risk management software. Okay. So it's all online. So it's not like a guy can just buy 1 million shares of something and then hope. Yeah, it was all custom programmed. We had a risk manager. You had set position limits, loss limits, everything else. So yeah, you could monitor it all and see who was doing what.
Your coping mechanism with this, you got into a lot of drinking and sleeping pills and stuff like that. I didn't know what Klonopin was.
Right.
Is that a sleeping pill or?
Vitamin K, or it's actually a anti-anxiety medicine.
Oh, really? That you can just get, or?
You need a prescription for it. You would be, I think, surprised how many people
are able to get prescriptions for
it. Are able to get prescriptions for that and almost anything else. And there are quite a few people who take it.
You think you developed a drinking problem, basically?
I do. I was, from the age of 16 on, I drank, and I drank to excess. After 9/11, the New York lifestyle is conducive to drinking, especially if you're in finance and you're entertaining clients at happy hour after a trading day or whatnot. After 9/11, and what people don't understand is how hard that hit the financial industry in New York. I go to my friends in L.A.
It shook me up when you said that there were hazmat guys taking body parts off your building.
Literally scouring the ledges for body parts. People in other parts of the country, it hurt and it hit them, but not like the New York finance community. We all lost friends. We all lost possible relatives. So it was a very tough event. After that, I, kicked the drinking up another notch instead of getting the therapy or the help I should have gotten to deal with the grief. And, after the arrest, that became, 5 or 6 or 7 drinks a night. Right. So rather than getting clean and having a clear head, I did drown my fear and anxiety and everything else in the drinking and trying to maintain, a stable approach and be a father and still coach their sports and do all that. I mean, I remember I was coaching and actually on the mound for my middle son, during the trial and doing these types of things. So,
Wow.
You had to have that, divorce the two worlds and try to compartmentalize. But yeah, I drank to excess.
So let's take you into the trial now. First of all, to me, you were completely doomed by association to be on with these two other guys, the brothers. Weren't you allowed to decouple yours?
No, I mean, that's there are so many institutional biases in the criminal justice system. That was just one of them. The prosecutors love to have a case with a guy who's really guilty and a guy who's maybe not guilty because, you can point to them by definition is what they did and said partner, friend. And then for me to defend myself like I did and say, hey, man, I didn't have a prepaid phone or pay cash bribes or do any of these things. It makes the other person look guilty. So kind of like the Martin Shkreli case that's coming up. Of course, they're not going to let them separate because the whole, defense is going to be for one guy to blast the other guy and fight it out amongst them. So my trial, yes, I should have had a separate case. That would have been just, but it was never going to happen, according to the prosecutors. And that was just, one of the many issues in the case that
we're going to talk a little
ridiculous.
bit about prosecutorial abuse. Now, let me ask you, there are 347 trades you guys did together, you and Zvi, I guess. 97 out of 100 lost money. First of all, do you feel it looks bad that the trading pattern was so similar when it turns out this guy's getting it from who knows where? And
No.
B, he seemed to lose money with Raj.
Yes. He got crushed with Raj. He crushed Raj. I think he lost Raj $50 million.
How can you lose when you have the perfect information?
But that's also just shows some of the weakness of the case. And even though Zvi was guilty, he was a tippy, there was a guy in between, and then there was a lawyer who was, I think, an IP lawyer or something. So he wasn't even a corporate lawyer. And he was like sitting in the lunchroom trying to overhear things. And he was digging through like garbage. I mean, it was like a circus show to some degree. He may have been passing on tips for companies that he thought he heard, but they could have been declaring bankruptcy or whatnot. A lot of the information was just nonsensical information. Zvi and I trading 347 stocks together. The government charged me with one. I thought that was a very big, something that would help my case. Zvi had information from lots of different sources, just like we all did, just like anybody on a trading desk. He had, of course, his illicit lawyer, 4 people removed from him.
Yeah.
But 99% of his other calls were from his SAC guy, his galleon guy, and everybody has a guy on Wall Street. I'm talking to my guy, from whatever fund. So
Right. Doesn't 347 seem like a lot to a guy that you were picking up was not as well plugged in?
Well, like any other thing, if you have proper discipline and risk management, I like the idea. The idea, and when you get a call, that's the beginning of the research process and the homework process.
Not the
so
end,
I would
is
get
it,
the
when
call, do my own research, talk to other people, look at the chart, punch up who the owners were, and then half the times I would short it, like I said, because I thought it was a deliberate disinformation or misinformation call. But if it was a bad call, I would have a tight stop loss and lose, nickels versus when a call really made sense, like 3Com really made sense. It was in the Wall Street Journal 2 weeks earlier, so it was out there, and the Wall Street Journal had every single detail of the transaction. They had Goldman as the bankers, Bain was the acquirer, and the price is low fives. I never got any details from Zvi whatsoever, other than I'm buying 3Com and I'm buying it for size, and I like this one.
Tell us now what it's like sitting in the courtroom and sitting at the verdict time. What's that like?
It's surreal, and it's an awful experience that I wouldn't wish on anybody. I mean, the way I describe it is jury selection. You think your heart's going to explode and you're overwhelmed. Opening statements, double it. Closing statements, quadruple that, and then during deliberations from the jury, they knock on the door anytime they want to give a note to the judge. And that note could say, we have a verdict, or it could say, hey, I want to replay these tapes. And every time there's a knock on the door, and you're just waiting there. And we waited there, I think, 5 days or so during deliberations. Your heart explodes because the rest of your life, and whether you're going to actually go to prison and be ripped away from your family and your children, is in the balance.
You're listening to Forensic Talk with Jim Campbell. We'll talk in the final segment moving forward and a little bit about prison as well. This is Jim Campbell, host of Forensic Talk. Tune into this station on Monday evenings at 6 p.m. for deep dives into the biggest crime stories today. Unsolved murders, financial crimes, penetrating questions.
I'm John Iannuzzi, producer of Forensic Talk with Jim Campbell. Each week, You'll hear in-depth interviews, whether it's Bobby Kennedy Jr. on his claims his cousin Michael Skakel is innocent of the Moxley murder, or a brutally honest conversation with Kathleen Willey, one of the women alleging sexual assault in the Clinton Oval Office, or the first interview after prison with an insider trader from the Raj Rajaratnam biggest insider trading scandal in Wall Street history.
That's Monday night at 6 p.m. We'll bring you the facts, the forensic, both sides of the story, from insider trading to crimes of passion.
Forensic Talk with Jim Campbell is brought to you by Park City Productions. Like us on Facebook, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and follow us on Instagram. That's Park City Productions 06604.
And we're back with Mike Kimelman, a hedge fund manager, went to jail and back. Tell us what prison is like. And you were at Lewisburg, actually near Lafayette and Lehigh, but it's not the country club that people thought it was. And then that you were in the same prison with these poor guys who sucked you into the trial, the two brothers.
I've described it as barbaric, and that's a good description. It's also incredibly mundane. It's like Groundhog Day. You're struggling to fill your days. In prison, there is a scarcity of almost everything, a scarcity of privacy, of decency. But what you do have is almost endless time. So I had time, and I tried to fill that by writing, going over the case.
And this is the book
down.
that came out of it, right?
It is the book that came out of it. It is trimmed down tremendously. I wrote about 800 pages while I was away. Obviously, nobody wants to read 800 pages on, prison and law and trading, or maybe like 7 of us do, but most people don't. So I trimmed that down to about 250 pages. But yeah, so I wrote, and, one of the strangest things about the prison experience was that the BOP, which is the Bureau of Prisons, in its infinite wisdom, decided that it would be a great idea to put me and the Goffer brothers together in prison. So Zvi had gotten there before me. In his insane calculations, I was the one who helped get him convicted. Not the 7 informants that got up and said, yeah, not the 500 hours of tape of him saying, holy cow, if we get caught, we're going to jail. But me, because I put up on the board, no prepaid cell phone, no cash bribes, no tapes. Again, at trial, we called the lead FBI case agent was our only defense witness. I mean, think about how unusual that is. And we asked her one question. In 2 years of body wires, wiretaps, tens of thousands of instant messages, emails, phone calls, everything else, can you point to one call where Mike Kimelman is given inside information and trades on it? And she hemmed and hawed and shook her head and this and that, but finally had to admit, no, I can't, So
did you feel any danger? I mean, apparently Zvi passed around that you might have been a rat, which of course is a way to get yourself killed in prison.
Right. He was the dumbest criminal, which the tapes make clear. He was the dumbest defendant, which a guy who was offered a plea of about 5 years could have been home in 3, instead got sentenced to 10 years. And he also became the dumbest inmate out there because, he got there early. He tried to arrange for people to hurt me. Life is very cheap in prison and money is very dear. So for a small amount of money, you can arrange for things. And he spread false rumors, such as that I was a rat. Now, that can get you hurt in prison. Obviously, if you're going to spread a false rumor like that, you're going to upset people who have been there. And there is a sort of jail, prison code. You don't go around calling people rats that aren't rats. And I had proof that I wasn't, obviously. I went to trial. So a lot of the Italian guys and a lot of the guys who had been there for a long time were like, how are you a cooperator if you went to trial? And I said, exactly. And so that then got them angry because it was really a violation of that.
Are you worried about him when he gets out of prison?
I mean, anybody who is stupid enough to do the things he did, sure, you have to have some concern. Doing.
Did you hang out with these guys at all while you were there? Did you talk to them much, or
no? I mean, I tried to quash whatever anger and imagined beef that was out there right when I got there, because again, prison's not the place to explore these types of things. Especially at a minimum security prison has a 0 tolerance for violence. So even if somebody came up to me and jumped me and beat the crap out of me, if I had marks on myself and the guards looked at me, I would get sent to solitary, and then they would transfer me up in security to a low or a medium, and a low or a medium, you start to get raped. So it's not a good thing.
Wow.
I tried to quash that. He was too stupid. I had, again, other people broached a peace.
Let me ask you this. What was this like? Surprised to read. Your family, your wife and kids only visited you twice during the whole time you were there. Your parents came more often. How did you deal with that? And you were also served for divorce in prison.
It was heartbreaking, and it was tough to deal with. My kids actually came quite a bit. My parents would fly from Los Angeles to New York, pick them up, and drive the 3 or 4 hours and have them visit me. So I saw them every 6 weeks or so, which was a taste of the real world, the outside world, and of course keeps you going. At the same time, it is heart-rendering to see them in that type of situation. And I talk about it at length in the book, some of the sadistic and awful things that the prison did to visiting families, or my family in particular as well. I tell the story of a guard literally ripping a McDonald's Happy Wheel car out of my 2-year-old son's hand, just because he felt like it. And that's, some of the hardest things to deal with. So the fact that my wife didn't come, hurt tremendously. In her defense, something like this, and I've said it before, it could either bring you together or pull you apart.
Right.
And we both let it pull us apart until you've walked a mile in her shoes and dealt with the stress and the public shame and everything else. I would ask people to withhold judgment. And she was busy supporting the kids. I mean, she was, at that time, our sole, means of support and working. But she, took it particularly hard.
Yeah. And it is understandable because she's innocent of the whole thing.
Absolutely.
And you're stuck in this thing.
As she liked to remind me, she married a Jewish lawyer from the San Fernando Valley, not a mobster from Queens.
Tell us now, what good came out of this? And obviously one thing is getting sober, right, from the thing. But what good came out of the whole thing?
Even though I seemed to have all the trappings of material success and everything else, I wasn't happy. I wasn't in a good marriage. I was not, when you're in that type of situation and you're drinking to excess, you're not the best father you can be. So by going away, it cleared my head. It allowed me to re-examine the priorities of my life, figure out what's really important in my life, to be grateful for everything I had, and then to come out with a clear head, trying to make a difference, a positive impact in people's lives, trying to be a better father, son, brother, friend, and person. And you really get, hopefully, a second chance, so that it is a tale of redemption and second chances to have a difference. Because, like I said, we're here for a very short time on this earth. We should try to live a purposeful life and have an impact somewhere. Very
well said. And I'm always fascinated by, I believe this country allows people to have second chances. And I'll be interested to see where you end up, because I've interviewed Rumi Khan several times, and she, of course, was involved in the Raj thing, and she's convinced she's not getting a second chance. And I keep saying, if you hang with it, you're going to get it. But
she might, but it'll actually be a third chance for Rumi. Because
I know.
Rumi actually got
she
clipped
did some
the first
dumb
time. Went back. She's a second-time insider trading offender, perhaps the only one out there. But
that's a good
not to dump on Rumi. Everybody deserves. And again, I'm not saying it's a victimless
and
crime.
She was
she
definitely
didn't
destroyed.
Murder somebody. She didn't rape. She didn't.
And she was definitely destroyed because she cried on the show several times. Both times she's been on. So I tell you, the book is incredibly honest, and you will get a great kick out of reading it. Do you feel like, and I always use this example, Secretary of Labor in the Ford administration is a guy named Ray Donovan. He was indicted and he was exonerated, and he came out of the court and he said, which agency do I go to get my reputation back?
Sure. And it's especially pronounced now, because back then you didn't have something called Google. So what judges don't understand, or prosecutors or anybody else now, especially employers, is that any indictment or conviction or arrest is a life sentence. If you get arrested and they drop the case, the arrest is front page. I mean, they frog marched us on CNBC Loop for, hours. Had they dropped my case, it would have been B23, a tiny paragraph saying, oh, whoops, we made a mistake with him. So it's a life sentence now, whether I got 1 year, 2 years, and it's something I have to deal with. And again, that's why I'm active in prison reform circles and whatnot, because they don't differentiate between. Many of the people who I was away with were away for growing a few plants, something that's legal now in most states, as it should be. Those people and somebody who murdered somebody have that same record. They're both convicted felons, and it's so easy to do a background check that they get.
You're exactly right, too, and the Wall Street guys are so hated. Dennis Kozlowski, who was Tyco, the same Enron thing, 90 months in jail, and the average murderer is 50.
Yeah.
Let's talk about prosecutorial abuse here, because there are so many things, and I'll let you go into it, but just let me mention some of these. The day that you were alleged to have traded in 3Com, you were actually with Alan Greenspan. Well, you can say how that happened. They strangled your wife's business by basically telling your bank you were doing money laundering, and she has a business that she was having to pay vendors. They appeared to violate lawyer and spousal privilege. You were followed into a bagel shop. And, I'll stop there. You can go on.
No, I mean, you hit it, and there was plenty of others. The law enforcement activities that went on during this case and the prosecutorial overreach, it was basically a culture of lawlessness. And there was a political, obviously, mandate to go find some people and hold them responsible and get guilty pleas out of them. But the actions that they took were reminiscent of, the Stasi in East Germany or Soviet. It's not stuff you would expect from United States law enforcement. I mean, I was a guy who grew up and, loved the United States, Star Spangled Banner, favorite song, would tear up, and baseball and apple pie and all that. And to have, like you said, some of the activities they did, such as shutting down my bank accounts. I mean, that's the ultimate guilty, before proven innocent. It's the exact flip of what it's supposed to be. How do you shut down someone's bank accounts? How do you then go shut down my wife's bank accounts that her business depends on, that we're depending on for our family? I mean, good luck trying to pay your mortgage these days with a money order. But that was just, like I said, one of them. The real absolute violations were there were multiple illegal wiretaps. Those wiretaps were run in a way that broke the law and was unconstitutional. They failed to minimize conversations between attorneys and clients, between spouses, and then there was even allegations that the FBI had planted a bug in one of the defendant's bedrooms and recorded conversations between a wife and the defendant. She actually ended up suing the FBI, and what has to be one of the first cases of that kind, the FBI actually settled the case because,
And did they give you access to all the transcripts in a timely fashion?
Look, prosecutors play that game all the time. They leak the information out. A lot of people end up pleading guilty before they've even seen exculpatory evidence that's out there.
Wow.
So they under Brady, which is one of the cases, you're supposed to give anything right away. They were still dumping tapes on us a week or a couple days before trial that were helpful to my trial. I mean, there were multiple tapes of an FBI informant who actually sat next to me on the trading desk for 18 months, wired up, wearing a wire, trying to incriminate me every day, and they didn't even call him at trial. So if I was part of this big, huge conspiracy...
And did he go to jail, that guy? Or?
He cooperated, so in our system, cooperators get a free pass. He did not go to prison.
And he never got anything on you, right? Even though you were...
I mean, there was nothing to get. He was,
I
wasn't looking.
Is there a definition of insider trading that we can put our arms around? I mean, they just had the Anthony Newman and Chasen's case overturned, right? And I think another. Is it something that's prosecutable?
It is. The funny thing is, and it's really a sad thing because people have gotten wrapped up in it, is insider trading has never been defined. Congress has never defined it. There's no statutory definition. I don't think there's much hope that Congress will actually define it, considering that it wasn't until 2012 that they even passed what's called the Stock Act, which says members of Congress are actually prohibited from insider trading. So, they sort of had a blanket exemption before that, and it's no wonder that, congressional portfolios outperform the market by an average of 6%, which there's no money manager out there does, 6% alpha a year, especially somebody who, if you have heard any of these congressmen or senators talk, they couldn't tell you the difference between a stock and a bond. But no, there is a patchwork of judge-made law that is what insider trading is. It's a fairly, straightforward definition now. It's the elements as they combine. It's basically you cannot use material, non-public information that is acquired in breach of a fiduciary duty or duty of confidentiality for a pecuniary benefit. So whoever's tipping it has to receive a personal benefit, and the person trading it at each level has to have knowledge that it was given, illicitly. That's the general definition. There is then 5 or 6 sub-elements of each one. It was a 70 or 80-page jury instructions that were read orally to our jury.
Which you don't think they really gathered?
No.
Grasp.
I mean, even if the judge gave the correct jury instructions, which everybody knows he did not. Admittedly, when the flight attendant on a plane tells you the little spiel about putting on your seatbelt or whatever, I think people forget that 30 seconds later, and that's a 2-minute pitch. Nobody can understand,
Good point.
80 pages of jury instructions that are hyper complex. So these cases should really be judged by a judge. It should be a bench trial, kind of like patent law or these other things.
Just amazing that reputation, business, wealth, family all destroyed. Have you been accepted back in Mamaroneck and Larchmont? Do you feel like people aren't thinking you're ex-con kind of?
I don't know. I think the people in Mamaroneck and Larchmont were very good to me, and it's a small town, so This was a tremendously public spectacle. I mean, I described walking out of the house, and there's 6 neighbors' houses within view, and of course 4 or 5 Crown.
And they were
Victoria
awakened,
FBI
right? Yeah, a
cars.
bunch of these guys.
Everybody was awake. I mean,
Yeah.
With dogs barking and everything else. People have been very fair, and they've been good people. So, I mean, I'm sure in any town, any place, there's going to be a handful of people who, are whispering or pointing fingers. But for the most part, the people who knew me understood me. The people who didn't know me were willing to give me a chance and at least say, hey, I read this. What's going on? Or do you want to talk about it or not? I think it's a town of good people, town of, who have been supportive.
How are your kids doing?
My kids are great. I mean, I've got a 12-year-old daughter who's almost 13, so even if nothing happened,
stuff,
yes,
yeah.
That's not the easiest age I would imagine for, middle school for teenage daughters. Probably, I'm not the first father to experience some of that turbulence.
Are they proud right now that you're on TV a lot and everything?
I think it's confusing for them,
Yeah,
and this is one of the hardest parts about what I did by opening up. And I think a lot of people write books like this and they gloss over it. I wrote a very transparent and honest and gave a very real and raw accounting of the pain and the fear and the anxiety of what it's like to be the target of a government investigation and to go through that. So there's a lot in there. My daughter has asked me to read it, multiple times, and I've asked her to wait. I've discussed it with all of them.
Oh, so she has not read it yet.
She has not read it yet. I've discussed it with all of them. She's wanted to listen to podcasts and all that, and I've asked her, eventually she's going to do it anyway, but I'd rather have the conversations with them first. My sons don't care. I mean, I coach their baseball. We play. We have fun. Boys are a little different, and they're younger. My youngest, it's 10 and 7, so...
Right.
At some point, they will care too. Part of writing this book was for me to get my story out there, obviously because the media and the press and the Justice Department had their own spin, which was ludicrous. But
which is said you're not allowed to put your spit out there because your lawyers won't. And I'll tell you, the book is incredibly honest, and you will get a great kick out of reading it. Do you feel like, and I always use this example, Secretary of Labor in the Ford administration is a guy named Ray Donovan. He was indicted and he was exonerated, and he came out of the court and he said, which agency do I go to get my reputation back?
Sure. And it's especially pronounced now because back then you didn't have something called Google. So what judges don't understand, or prosecutors or anybody else now, especially employers, is that any indictment or conviction or arrest is a life sentence. If you get arrested and they drop the case, the arrest is front page. I mean, they frog marched us on CNBC Loop for, hours. Had they dropped my case, it would have been B23, a tiny paragraph saying, oh, whoops, we made a mistake with him. So it's a life sentence now, whether I got 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. And it's something I have to deal with. And again, that's why I'm active in prison reform circles and whatnot, because they don't differentiate between many of the people who I was away with were away for growing a few plants, something that's legal now in most states, as it should be. Those people and somebody who murdered somebody have that same record. They're both convicted felons, and it's so easy to do a background check that they get.
You're exactly right, too. And the Wall Street guys are so hated. Well, Dennis Kozlowski, who was Tyco, the same Enron thing, 90 months in jail, and the average murderer is 50.
Yeah.
And he's largely innocent, too, by the way. Anyway, I want to thank Mike Kimelman. It takes a lot of guts, by the way, to take on the feds, if you will, particularly Pete Barra's office. They're very tough. And the book is Confessions of a Wall Street Insider, a cautionary tale of rats, feds, and banksters, and there's a lot of, I would call, dark humor in it, too, so you'll enjoy it from that perspective, a lot of sarcasm as well as the truth. You've been listening to Forensic Talk with Jim Campbell. Thanks to Mike Kimelman. Thanks to our audience. We'll see everybody next week on Forensic Talk with Jim Campbell.